Today we are doing a Q&A with immigration attorney Rachel Rutter, who is also the executive director of Project Libertad, which is based in Norristown, Pennsylvania. I am Valerie Harteg. I am on the board of Penn T-Cell East, and I have Eliza Brumbaugh with me. She is the co-chair of our advocacy committee, also on the board, and the executive director of the Literacy Council of Norristown. So welcome, everyone. Today, Rachel is with us to highlight some key points from her professional development presentation that she often does for educators around know your rights and around kind of immigration 101 basics, things that we all need to know as educators in the space and that we as allies of English learners in our communities should know, and especially right now, given the current state of things with the new presidential administration. So I'm going to invite Rachel to introduce herself and share a bit more, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Hi, thank you for having me, Val. As Val said, my name is Rachel, and my background is as an immigration attorney. I worked with Val for several years at Highest, Pennsylvania, and I am the founder and executive director at Project Libertad. We are actually based in Phoenixville, but we do a lot of work in Norristown. We probably do more work in Norristown than we do in Phoenixville, to be honest. So we partner with schools in Chester, Montgomery, and Bucks counties to provide services to newcomers. So we are providing legal and social services to these kids. So I do the bulk of the legal work as our only attorney, and then we have a whole bunch of different social service programs that we offer, from school-based programming to ESL classes to summer camp, etc.
Thanks for that clarification, Rachel. And thanks for all the work that you do. So let's just start off with a basic question just to make sure that everyone has a clear understanding. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between an undocumented immigrant and a documented immigrant?
Yes, so basically when we're talking about immigration status, we're talking about the type of permission that somebody has to be here in the United States. We do a lot of know your rights for kids. So when I talk to them, I always kind of make it like the equivalent of a hall pass. Like if you want to go to the bathroom during class, what do you need? And to kind of say that because it's something that they can really tangibly understand. Um, so I do think that the line like between documented and undocumented gets pretty blurry, and a lot of people don't understand that. So I mean, in very basic terms, if you're talking about someone who is undocumented, they just don't have the required documentation. They don't have any type of lawful immigration status. And we're talking about someone who is like 100% documented. Maybe they have their citizenship or a green card. But there's a lot of people that are in gray areas in between. For example, if we're talking about asylum seekers, which is a lot of the people that are coming across the border and that we hear about in the news, we treat asylum seekers as if they're undocumented or doing something unlawful, but they're actually just following the only asylum process that exists for them. So I think it's not quite as cut and dried of a distinction as people like to think that it is.
Thanks for sharing that, Rachel. That's helpful. So in thinking about the undocumented population specifically in the United States, what are some major threats and challenges to this population, both children and adults, just that they face in general when living in the United States?
Right. So, I mean, one of the biggest things is so we work primarily with unaccompanied children. So, these are kids that have come to the border without a parent or legal guardian, and they are not 18 yet and don't have any lawful immigration status. And so, they're automatically placed in removal proceedings, which basically means deportation proceedings for people who are not lawyers. And so, we like I said, we treat asylum seekers, people seeking safety, as if they're doing something wrong. We put them in removal proceedings in immigration court, and there's no right to a court-appointed lawyer for anybody, including children, in immigration court. So they're facing potential of deportation. The government has a lawyer who is arguing for their deportation, and if they can't either find a lawyer through a legal services organization or hire one, then they would have to represent themselves. So that's one of the biggest threats, is that through that process, they'll end up being deported back to their home country. And often that's a dangerous situation that they're trying to get out of. Other challenges include like reuniting with family members that they probably haven't seen in a long time. That can be like somebody who's more of a distant relative and they don't know them. It can be a parent they haven't seen in 10 years. It can mean they have younger siblings that they've never met who are US citizens. So you have mixed status families, and it can be confusing to them also, like, why do I have to deal with these immigration issues and my like little siblings who were born here don't? Um, there's a lot of mental health challenges because, as I said, most of the kids that we work with are coming from some type of violent situation. So they've experienced trauma. In most cases, multiple forms of trauma from being in their home country to their journey to their time here in the US. They also go through immigration detention. So there's another traumatic event there. And there's then like a lack of services to kind of meet those needs. There's a lack of mental health services for them. They lack access to things like health insurance, medical, dental care, mental health care. A lot of times we're dealing with kids who are teenagers that don't have like stable housing, stable food, clothes, a winter coat, like all of those types of just material things that we need. So there's a lot of challenges that they're dealing with. Another big one is that they often come with like a debt that they then have to work off to repay from their journey. So they're also at risk of being re-victimized here in the U.S., whether that's like abuse of family members, trafficking, etc.
And so you named a number of challenges related to navigating the court system and immigration legal services. And you also talked about mental and emotional challenges that folks face. For us as educators, and I'm speaking broadly about our Penn TESOL East membership. So we have folks who are teaching in K-12 contexts, in higher education, in community-based adult ESOL contexts. How do some of these challenges show up in our classrooms, in our work one-on-one with students? What can we expect?
So we work primarily, like I said, with educators who are dealing with like the K through 12 population. So, I mean, right now, especially, I think there's a ton of fear. And a lot of times their English teacher is one of their like trusted people, even in having all that fear. So they'll probably be getting a lot of questions about what people should do and whether it's safe to go to school and that type of thing. So on our website, if you go to our homepage, we have a button that just says like resources for supporting immigrant youth and families. That was originally created for like schools, but it's actually been something we started sharing just with like other orgs and stuff too. So I changed the name of it, but it's still for teachers. And that has a really good starting point. Like the three key things that I would want people to remember right now are that they should talk to a lawyer, that they should know what their rights are in case they find themselves dealing with ICE or the police, and that they should have a plan in case of emergency with their family in case someone does get detained or deported, which it seems like that's something that's likely going to touch a lot more people in the coming months and years. So you should know what you're going to do, ahead of time. I would encourage teachers to definitely emphasize them speaking with a lawyer because while there are a lot of people who don't have options for status, there are also a lot of people who might have an option that they just don't know about because they're afraid to go talk to a lawyer. And I'm a member of some groups for like multilingual learners or educators of multilingual learners and things that are just kind of generally about supporting those students. And I've seen a lot of like posts of people asking things that are kind of legal advice. So I would also want to warn you to not give legal advice if you're not an attorney. Even if you think you know the answer, you probably don't really know the full complexity of the question. So do not give legal advice. Do not give reassurances that you can't actually give. Just send the person to an attorney. I think doing things like what you're doing, Val, bringing in these types of resources, a lot of the schools we work with bring us in to do these types of sessions for educators and to also do know your rights for students and parents is super helpful. And we've been getting a ton more requests for that type of service now. I kind of feel like I lost track of the question. I think I went on too long of a tangent.
I think
Um,
I think you answered it very well. And I think a couple things that really stood out that we really want to emphasize here are that it's really important to get credible immigration legal advice and for that to happen directly between the individual and an immigration attorney and have that not come from an educator, but a crucial way that we can play a role is to encourage that and also potentially provide referrals, to again credible immigration attorneys who are, not going to take advantage of individuals.
We do have lists of attorney referrals and nonprofit referrals on our website as well. And no guarantees, but that we only include people on those lists that we think are trustworthy. And I think it can also help to prepare people for like what going to an attorney looks like. And I think that's info that's fine for a teacher to share if you feel comfortable. So what I've started actually adding to our Know Your Rights, because every time I do a Know Your Rights, I inevitably get people saying, I came in this year and this happened, and can I do X? And it's just going to take a lot longer of a conversation to know the answer to that question. So everybody kind of wants a quick or like reassuring, easy answer. But the only way is to go do a consultation with an immigration lawyer, which is probably at least an hour long. And they're going to ask you a ton of probably uncomfortable questions about your history and everything. And everything is private. We don't share your information with anyone. There's a lot of fear about going to see an attorney because I think maybe people think that we're somehow affiliated with the government or ICE or something, but we're like 100% on your side. We're there for you. And even if you go and you decide not to apply for anything, if you have options, like we're not going to force you to do something that you don't want to do. But there's literally nothing to lose by learning what your options are, and you might potentially gain something if you do learn of an option you want to pursue. So I think like having the conversation of like, this is actually what you need to do to get the answer to this question. Not ask your ESL teacher, but actually go through this probably uncomfortable, maybe a little time consuming experience. But it's just the only way to actually get like real help for the situation.
That's really important. And perhaps we as a person that students trust can be that source of encouragement and reassurance to go and have that meeting that you said might be nerve
Absolutely. And we
wracking.
get a lot of referrals from teachers. Another thing I would flag for like K through 12 teachers is that there are some types of status, like special immigrant juvenile status, that kids will age out of in Pennsylvania once they turn 18. So don't be shy about referring them as soon as possible. Definitely refer them even if they are 18. That doesn't mean that they don't have any options, but you don't want to like miss out on opportunities because of just waiting too long to refer someone. So.
Yeah, thank you. So talking about rights specifically, what are rights that immigrant families, so again, we're thinking about, children as well as adults, should know that we as educators, non-lawyers, can and should share with them? What are those rights? And I know there's been a lot of, sharing, a lot of info sharing that we've all seen. But if you could just highlight those for us, please.
So kind of the two biggest ones that I always come back to are to not speak, not answer any questions. They have the right to remain silent if they are asked any questions by police or ICE, and they should not say anything, and not to sign anything without talking to a lawyer, because a lot of times you can sign like voluntary departure or something and not realize what you're signing. So those are the two big ones that I think are like safe for anybody to communicate to them. They also have the right to attend public school, regardless of immigration status, under a Supreme Court case. And I think they can also reassure students that ICE cannot come in spite of the like secure or sensitive locations memo being undone, which was a policy that was in place since like 2011 that basically prohibited ICE from doing enforcement action in sensitive locations, which included things like schools, hospitals, churches, etc. So basically, it was never a law that they couldn't do that, right? It was just kind of something they decided internally, like that looked bad to do, basically. So Trump got rid of that. So now they can do enforcement pretty much wherever they want. But that doesn't mean that the school will let them in, right? There are still federal privacy laws that protect student information. And a lot of the schools we partner with have been putting out really good information to families about that, school ICE officials would not be allowed into the building even without a judicial warrant, and that FERPA still protects student privacy. So I think like even though it sounds really scary to say like ICE could go into schools, they're not going to be allowed to just like walk down the halls and like ask for their undocumented students, right? So there's been, and I think part of even undoing that policy was just to create fear. So I think it's important for schools or institutions, wherever people are teaching, to communicate clearly to families, like, we're not going to cooperate with ICE. They're not going to be allowed anywhere without a warrant. We're not going to share your information, et cetera, whatever your specific policies are. Sorry, my dog decided to join the conversation. And I think that can go a long way in reassuring families, especially for people who are actually at school districts. And I know people's hands can be a little bit tied depending on, the comments to come from the administration. But
That was going to be my next question, talking about, the change in sensitive locations and ICE interaction. So thanks for speaking to that. I think that is really reassuring. And so those are all of my questions. Eliza, do you have anything else that you want to ask?
I think that the last thing that we should probably ask is if it is possible to have like the full, whole, comprehensive Know Your Rights presentation from Project Libertad. And if it is possible, how would we go about recommending that the educators in our network would invite you?
yeah, definitely. We've been getting a lot of requests. The easiest way is just to email me, and all of our info is on the website. Just reach out to me directly and we can set that up.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rachel.
And thank you
Thank
for
you for
having
all of
me.
this information.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you so much, Rachel. Yes. And we'll be sure, everybody who's watching will make sure to share that contact information, Project Libertad's websites, which links to all of those resources that Rachel mentioned, and make sure that you all have access to that. So Rachel, thank you for your work. We really appreciate you. And yeah, great to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you both so much.